The fall of Hyacinthum Fenestra is one of the enduring mysteries surrounding subsector Titus. This forge world, the industrial heart of a neglected corner of the Imperium, once stood as a monument to the strength of Mars in one of the farthest reaches of the galaxy. A world of faded deserts and vast industrial sprawls, its dusty carved surface had long been the staging ground for works of titanic proportions. Every planet in its near space, from the greatest of hives to the lowliest of feudal backwaters, the mining moons of gas giants and the lonely stations that mark the routes between stars bore the fruits of her labors. It was through the toil of the forges that ships sailed the warp, hive cities towered into the atmospheres, and armies marched to war. Whatever the year, whatever the calamity engulfed the Imperium, Hyacinthum Fenestra was at the center of a boundless web of communications and trade, the spike around which the entire subsector turned. On the eve of the 42nd millennium, as the forces of Abaddon the Despoiler descended in their last great strike against the walls of embattled Cadia, the attention of subsector Titus were wholly elsewhere. In a single moment, the deluge of Vox signals and nospheric communiques that encased this bustling world of industry ceased. There was no cascade, no gradual breakdown of intertwined Vox networks, not even any desperate calls for aid. Instead, the entire world, its moons, and all its subsector-wide listening posts simply fell silent. How a bastion of the Adeptus Mechanicus can go dark is beyond all but the most wild of speculations. Attempts to uncover the reality of these events are further hampered by an enduring inquisitorial sanction that has quarantined the world and its holdings, including entry to those few listening posts that remain accessible to us. With such restrictions in place, not to mention the dangers involved in reaching the subsector itself thanks to the Cicatrix maledictum, only the most persistent of investigators has any hope of finding the truth. Thankfully, persistence is what we are best at. Through many hours spent trawling the data stacks of Tenebrum Octavis, the mounting of several expeditions into the subsector, and with the special dispensation of the Synod of Mars, the Order Theoreticus has compiled what is believed to be the most thorough possible record of the fate of this world. In order to better guard against the predations of the arch-enemy, and for the sake of knowledge itself, it is our duty to present the fall of Hyacinthum Fenestra. The machine sickness. The events that led to the collapse of Hyacinthum Fenestra begin far from the world itself. Within the depths of wild space at the edge of subsector Titus, in an astral volume claimed by the Brotherhood of Rust, there once lay an outpost. A lone platform buried in the ice of a rogue planet, this place was known to few and accessible to fewer. Named the Costus Horde, it was the site of some of the most twisted experiments carried out by this ruinous confederation. Here was where the warpsmiths and magos researchers of the Dark Mechanicum gathered, experimenting with abominations too volatile to be invoked on one of their twisted fortress worlds. Hidden in the darkness between stars, the isolation of the Costus Horde was essential in maintaining its secrecy. However, this also left the site vulnerable to attack and far from reinforcement. When one day its thin atmosphere was split by the hammering of macro-cannon batteries and the flare of landing craft, the research station was helpless. The complex itself fell quickly, its defenses torn down by the towering forms of night titans, whilst its surface buildings were breached by eerily well-coordinated strike teams. Though its vaults held many twisted demon engines and powerful woe machines, the invaders ignored these. Their target was instead a single data stack contained within an immense Faraday cage. It held an ancient piece of scrap code, an archaic data demon hailing from the dark age of technology, the Azure Djinn. A world in motion. If the intelligence services that operated within subsector Titus were aware of this attack, it seems to have been dismissed as mere infighting within the ranks of the archenemy. Certainly no word of it reached Hyacinthum Fenestra, and, as its final months drew closer, the Forge world continued to operate as normal. The planet was in the midst of great labor, as it always was. Huge stockpiles of hardware were being produced to supply the myriad needs of subsector Titus. Everything from commercial vehicles and civilian tools to weapons of war were made in inconceivable numbers. From its forges, these boons rose in space elevators to the world's orbital ring, there to be loaded into mass conveyors and merchant vessels and shipped across the subsector. In particular, the focus of the world had shifted to arming and equipping the gathering armies that would soon strike into the holdings of the Brotherhood of Rust. The Forge World's preeminent guardians, the Sisters of Our Lady of Perpetual Ammunition, had returned in strength. Some were there to train as artificers, others to garrison the planet itself, whilst most were there to rearm. A cruiser under their command hung in the orbital ring, being refitted and loaded with a wealth of ammunition, armor, weapons and vehicles that was the Sisters' due. Once fully equipped, this force was intended to follow in the wake of the assault into the arch-enemy's holdings, acting as a second wave of reinforcements and supplies for the rest of the Order that would have already engaged the heretics. It seems that, despite the protection they brought, the sheer number of holy warriors had drawn ire from some elements of the Mechanicus upon the world. They saw their shrine to the Omnissiah being desecrated by the presence of so many ecclesiarchal fanatics. In response, the Forge World's impressive Skitarii maniples were in full display, marching through the cluttered avenues of its cities and arrayed in great formations in its parade zones. Striding above them walked a small detachment of Titans from Legio Ataris, these god machines striding forth to reaffirm the might of the Omnissiah. It is worth noting that a significant force of Mechanicus explorators were also on Hyacinthum Fenestra. Their presence was something of an oddity for the Forge World, their members not quite fitting into the rigid hierarchy established by the Magi and the senior tech priests. Those who would venture so far from the voice of Holy Mars were seen by some of their kin as half-devoted. This was not helped by the explorators' evident lack of success in finding anything of particular value over the last 3 centuries. The Battle Sisters took a more favorable view of these roaming tech priests, with some of their most venerable members having served alongside them in the distant reaches of the Segmentum Obscurus. Already having been upon the world for several years, the explorators were preparing to depart. Once their meager findings were fully categorized, their stocks refilled and their data vaults transcribed, their small force of pioneers would leave the safe harbor of their Forge World to once again trawl the stars for ancient relics. In these busy months, it can be said that the air of the world was electric with tension. Although every faction present acted in service to the Imperium, and even in service to Hyacinthum Fenestra herself, the clash of religious doctrine, ecumenical politicking, and an itching desire to return to the front made conflict a very real possibility. Whilst the Canoness argued with the Magus Logistica about the speed of their resupply, and the senior explorators struggled with obvious favoritism in the priority lists of the Lex Mechanics, a more malignant force was moving in the shadows.